Okay, let's unpack this. Patriotism.
Hmm.
It's a feeling that runs pretty deep for many of us, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It feels incredibly natural.
Yeah, like cheering your heart out for your team in a huge match, maybe, an India-Pakistan cricket showdown.
Yeah.
Or the way some songs just stir something inside.
Definitely. It gives you this powerful sense of being part of something much bigger than just yourself.
That sense of belonging, that shared identity, it's really potent.
It's incredibly powerful. It connects people across vast differences, providing a real common ground.
Totally. But here's where it gets, well, really fascinating and honestly a bit complex. Is that feeling, that deep love for your country, is it the same thing as doing what's morally right?
Ah, that's the crux of it.
It's easy for them to get tangled up,
Mhm.
Patriotism and morality, like headphones jammed in your pocket.
Right, and mistaking one for the other, that can get messy. Real confusion can set in.
It's a critical distinction to make. Think
Yeah.
of patriotism giving you that strong, unifying feeling, almost like the flavor of a really good samosa.
Satisfying, yeah. Full of character.
Exactly. But morality, that's more like the nutritional value, the principles you need for a balanced life. Patriotism gives you that burst of pride, maybe, but it feels incomplete without the grounding principles of morality.
Well put. So our mission here in this deep dive is to explore that space.
Yeah, the tension, the overlap between loving your country and living by a moral code.
We're going to look at why that intense patriotic feeling doesn't just automatically give you a free pass on your ethical compass.
And why understanding that difference is so crucial today. We're looking into some really fascinating perspectives that dive right into this relationship.
So at its core, what is patriotism? Fundamentally, it's defined pretty simply: love for one's country.
Right. It's often triggered by symbols, the flag, the anthem.
The feeling of pride at, say, the Olympics when your country's athletes are competing.
Oh yeah, that moment. When the national anthem plays on a global stage, it can send shivers down your spine.
It really can. Or even something more mundane, like picking up a packet of biscuits and seeing "Made in India."
It taps into that same emotional connection, doesn't it? Very real.
And you see this love expressed in some incredibly powerful ways. We looked at material describing, for instance, the dedication of a soldier, standing guard on the border, maybe in a place like Siachen.
Enduring those extreme conditions.
Exactly, out of a deep sense of duty to the nation. That's patriotism in action.
Or think about the collective celebration across the country when Gukesh won that big chess tournament in Norway. That was June 4th, 2025.
Right. That shared public joy, that's a form of patriotic pride, too. Very visible.
There was also that quite striking example from May 2025, the family Mumbai, who actually canceled their vacation to Turkey.
Ah, yes, I remember reading about that.
Apparently their 10-year-old son questioned traveling to a country he thought was supporting Pakistan.
Wow. That shows patriotism influencing a personal family decision in a really direct, visceral way.
These examples really highlight the strength of that emotional pull.
They do, but the sources we looked at also stress that patriotism is complex, often described as, a double-edged sword.
Okay, also.
Well, on one side, it can inspire genuine selflessness, incredible acts of service.
Like the accounts of RSS cadres mobilizing during natural disasters. You see them helping out from Kerala right up to Himachal.
Exactly. Discussions around October 2024 noted this as a kind of service patriotism, putting community and national well-being into action. Very impactful.
That dedication is hard to argue with.
Undeniable. But then there's the other edge of the sword. That's when patriotism becomes rigid, exclusionary.
You mean when it starts demanding specific loyalty tests?
Yes, or as some sources noted, labeling people who dissent or just have different views as anti-national.
It's like patriotism, in that mode, sort of dictates who belongs and who doesn't. Sometimes without really considering principles like fairness or inclusion.
And this is precisely where morality becomes so crucial. It acts as the necessary compass that patriotism, which is often driven by emotion and identity, sometimes lacks.
Right. Morality isn't really rooted in symbols or slogans like Bharat Mata Ki Jai, is it? It's based on more universal principles.
It's that inner sense, isn't it? The conscience that tells you cheating or lying or harming others is wrong, regardless of the context.
Not tied to a flag or a border, it's bigger than that.
It functions like an internal referee. For example, it would blow the whistle if you were tempted to justify something unethical, like corruption, by claiming it's somehow for the greater good of the country.
Ah, okay. Morality insists on judging actions based on whether they are intrinsically right or wrong.
Correct. And this is where things can get really complicated and, frankly, quite problematic. It's when patriotism starts getting dressed up as morality.
When the emotional pull of national loyalty sort of overrides or even replaces ethical judgment.
Precisely. And that confusion can lead to situations where, say, questioning government actions is suddenly seen as disloyalty to the whole nation.
Or where national pride is used to justify actions that, deep down, feel morally wrong.
It's like putting someone unqualified in a really important job just because they look the part or seem really enthusiastic rather than checking their actual competence or integrity.
Can you give us some examples from the material that really bring this conflict to life?
Certainly. One situation that came up was the experience of Congress leader Salman Khurshid in Malaysia. This was on June 2nd, 2025.
Okay, what happened there?
He was part of an all-party delegation. Their mission was to convey India's united stance against terrorism after the Pahalgam attack, a critical message.
Right, showing a united front.
Exactly. But as sources noted, the focus back home seemed to shift almost immediately. It wasn't so much about the anti-terrorism message anymore.
What was it about then?
It became about criticism based purely on the political optics.
Uh-huh.
Him, a Congress leader, being seen with members of the BJP.
Ah, I remember that now. So the national security imperative, condemning terrorism, got kind of overshadowed by partisan politics.
That's how it was framed in the discussion. Morality, in that scenario, would likely focus on the universal wrong of terrorism and the importance of unity against it. But patriotism, when it gets twisted, became tangled in political loyalty tests.
Interesting. Any other examples?
Well, there were the social media trends like hashtag boycott Turkey and hashtag boycott Azerbaijan back in May 2025.
Right, those flared up after reports suggesting those countries were supporting Pakistan.
And it wasn't just online talk, it led to real actions, like that Mumbai family we mentioned canceling their trip. It even got to the point where Turkey's Department of Tourism had to put out a statement to reassure Indian travelers.
For many people, I imagine that feels like a straightforward patriotic response. Standing firm against countries perceived as adversaries.
It does feel like that on the surface.
Yeah.
But the deeper question morality asks is this action fundamentally fair? Is it constructive? Does it address the underlying issue ethically? Or is it mostly an expression of national sentiment, amplified very quickly online?
And the speed of social media plays a big role there.
A huge role. Sources exploring this noted the emotional intensity and speed, suggesting it's often driven more by that patriotic fervor than, say, deep moral thinking.
And this dynamic, unfortunately, can take a much darker turn sometimes.
It can. Several sources pointed out how nationalism, which you could see as a more intense, sometimes more aggressive form of patriotism, has historically been used to justify exclusion, discrimination.
And even violence against perceived outsiders or minorities within a nation.
They brought up examples like Donald Trump, material referencing comments where he reportedly called the January 6th Capitol rioters great patriots, or embraced the label nationalist while associating with controversial figures.
So the idea is that patriotism without that moral tether
can lose its positive side and start looking more like a mob mentality, prioritizing loyalty to the in-group over universal human principles. Less like a movement for justice, more like, well, a mob with flags, as one source put it.
India's situation with patriotism feels particularly layered, doesn't it? It's often described as this unique kind of experiment.
It really is. India is often described as something like a multi-nation state. Think about it. One country, but encompassing countless distinct cultures, languages, religions, regional identities.
A huge amount of diversity under one flag.
Exactly. And this reality creates a constant, ongoing discussion about what being Indian truly means. How does that relate to a unifying national identity?
So for patriotism to work constructively in India,
some perspectives argue it has to be inclusive. It needs to celebrate that mosaic, that diversity, rather than trying to impose one single rigid definition of Indianness.
because trying to force everyone into one narrow mold.
Risks creating a really divisive, my country, right or wrong attitude that could actually fracture the very unity it claims to promote.
If we go back to the RSS example, they're credited with that impactful service patriotism during crises, promoting cultural identity and responsibility.
Yes, but sources also brought up the point that a strong push for purely cultural nationalism, however well-intentioned, can sometimes lead to people from different backgrounds feeling marginalized, feeling less Indian. which raises questions about fairness and true inclusion.
It creates a stark contrast with the perspective attributed to someone like Rabindranath Tagore. I think it was referenced in a 2021 piece.
Yes, his famous line, "Patriotism cannot be our final spiritual shelter. My refuge is humanity."
That's powerful. It suggests that loving your country is important, valuable, but
It shouldn't override our basic connection and responsibility to all humans. Morality, in this view, is universal. Patriotism is specific, tied to a place.
and trying to swap them, use patriotism as morality.
The sources discussing Tagore framed it as ultimately ineffective, like trying to pay your bills with monopoly money. It just doesn't work in the real ethical world.
And now, this whole complex dynamic has found a new playground, right? The digital age, social media.
Oh, absolutely. Patriotism is played out constantly online at high speed.
We saw that with the reaction to the Paris Saint-Germain post about Diku Kish's chess win on June 4th, 2025.
The engagement was massive, wasn't it? Hundreds of replies, thousands of reposts, huge numbers of likes. Patriotism now has this whole digital interaction layer.
And social media can definitely amplify the good stuff, like how fans rallied online after that terrible stampede at Chinnaswamy Stadium in Bengaluru after the RCB win on June 4th, sharing grief, offering support.
Yes, it can facilitate that connection, but it also creates an environment for incredibly rapid reactions. Intense patriotic feeling can fuel instant judgments, quickly labeling people or groups unpatriotic or anti-national.
Often without much room for nuance or careful thought.
Exactly. The speed at which things like the hashtag boycott Turkey trend spread shows that. The internet gives everyone a megaphone, but often without the filters needed for, well, considered moral reflection.
So given how powerful patriotism is and these potential dangers, why is morality so absolutely essential? Why is it the guardrail we need?
Because without that moral check, patriotism can become a tool for injustice. Some sources explicitly warn about this, especially in what they called populist democracies.
How so?
The language of love for country can be strategically deployed to silence dissent, to target minority groups, or to justify actions that bypass ethical norms or even the rule of law.
It provides a convenient, emotionally resonant banner to hide behind.
That's the danger. And there was a perspective shared by Sadhguru back in 2017 that touched on this. He noted that while our ideas about morality might differ across cultures, there's a more universal core sense of basic humanity, not harming others, treating people with dignity.
And if your patriotism leads you to violate that core sense,
Then, the sources suggest you've lost your moral grounding. You're not being a hero, you're potentially causing harm, regardless of the flag you wave.
so morality forces us to ask those tough questions. Like, is it right to exclude someone just because of their identity?
Is it ethical to bend the rules or look the other way on injustice, even if it's claimed to be for the nation?
And the perspectives we explored suggest that when you feel that strong patriotic pull towards something, but your inner moral compass says, hang on, this doesn't feel right.
That's the voice you need to listen to. Patriotism provides the engine, maybe, but morality provides the steering wheel and the brakes.
We've seen these tensions play out in real events too. The JNU controversy back in 2016 over those alleged anti-India slogans, that feels like a key example.
It does. Sources discussing it highlighted how much of the public reaction seemed driven by emotion. Some analysts even talked about entrepreneurs of emotion who capitalized on patriotic sentiment rather than a calm, evidence-based look at what actually happened.
It became about feelings more than facts for many.
That was the argument. Or think about a more recent scene described at Newark Airport, June 9, 2025. A U.S. citizen of Indian descent saw a young Indian man being deported.
What was the tension there?
It was described as this conflict between, on one hand, the legal process, adhering to regulations which you could frame as a patriotic duty to uphold the law, and on the other hand, the moral impulse to question the humanity of the situation. Seeing someone handcuffed, clearly distressed.
Right, the clash between following the rules and asking if the outcome is humane.
Exactly. And then there was the G7 summit situation in June 2025. India wasn't invited to the meeting hosted by Canada. Some, like the Congress Party, called it a diplomatic bungle.
Okay, so patriotism might trigger immediate outrage, a feeling of national slight.
Potentially, yes. Demanding a strong, maybe quite emotional reaction, but morality, or maybe just a call for deeper understanding, might prompt you to look further.
Asking why it happened. Looking at the context, like the strained India-Canada relationship since the whole 2023 Khalistan issue.
Precisely. Patriotism often wants a quick, unified response. Morality frequently requires a pause, reflection, considering the bigger picture.
So looking at India's journey, this ongoing experiment as a multi-nation state, it feels like a really critical test case for how patriotism and diversity can actually work together.
It really does. If patriotism in India comes to mean demanding absolute conformity, forcing everyone into one single mold,
Sources suggest that just won't work. It clashes too much with the country's fundamental pluralism.
but if patriotism can evolve, if it can mean embracing the differences, becoming a patriotism defined by shared values like justice, fairness, compassion for all citizens, no matter their background,
Then maybe India could offer a way forward, a model.
potentially, yes, a compelling one.
Yeah.
It brings to mind poets like the Sufi Bulleh Shah and those famous lines, Mazda Tahada, break the mosque, break the temple.
A sentiment we've seen in Bollywood too, like in the film Dil Se.
Right. Sources noted how that perspective points to a love that goes beyond specific buildings or specific identities, a love for humanity itself.
Suggesting that true connection isn't limited by borders or group affiliations.
Exactly, and maybe patriotism could learn from that. Focus less on drawing rigid lines and more on fostering a broader, more inclusive sense of shared human connection. Less chest thumping, perhaps, more heart opening.
So when we tie all these threads together, what really stands out is, well, patriotism is incredibly powerful. It can inspire amazing acts of selflessness, real positive contributions.
Absolutely, but, and this is the crucial but, it is not a free pass. It's not an excuse to ignore our basic moral duties, to treat others unjustly, or to abandon core ethical principles.
Morality has to be the guide, the compass, the guardrail, whatever analogy works. It's what stops patriotism from going off the rails and becoming harmful, divisive, or oppressive.
And in today's world, with instant reactions, social media amplification, leaders often using national symbols to rally support, it's maybe more vital than ever for each of us to consciously keep our moral compass active.
So, at the end of the day, patriotism is about love for your country.
And morality is about love for what's universally right, what's fundamentally humane.
And when those two things seem to pull in different directions, especially when that patriotic feeling is intense,
That's the moment to pause, take a breath, consult that inner voice, your conscience.
and ask yourself, this action, this feeling, this stance I'm taking, is it truly aligned with basic fairness, with justice, with our shared humanity? How do you, listening now, navigate that often tricky space between loving your country fiercely and doing what you genuinely believe is right?